We'll keep it. So, but all that part we talked about. So, we put our testimonies in the book and sent it to the minister, and then also, we've had Brother Jesse. He came down. We've had members of the E-team that have come down. I asked Minister for the permission for Brother Rashad. I also asked him for Brother Haroon. Brother Haroon said he's not ready yet. And the last person that we had with the team was Brother Don. It's a very powerful testimony. Don Enoch. Very powerful. And it's just like, when you see Brother Don, he's a very sharp dresser, but he said how growing up, his mother would teach him about fashion, bring him to New York, and they'll go into these high-end stores, and she would point out the different stitching. And what we want to do is, people, I can talk about Minister Farrakhan from what the experience that I've had with him, and from what Allah blesses me to see of him, but there are people like yourself who've been around the minister. Right. And that's why I want to give people an opportunity to hear those testimonies, but we'll get to that. But first, we want to talk about, I heard you say this morning how you came, and you told me before, you came into the nation at the age of 18. So how did you join the Nation of Islam?
Good question first. Listen to that. I wanted to say, before I answer his question, I want to tell you a story. Seniors are good at telling stories because they've been around so long. They got many of them. But he didn't have any way to know what happened in Gabon in May of 1993 when we went to attend the third African-American Summit. Let me see, the second one. The president sent the plane to pick the minister up. We had a delegation of about 23. I was living in Accra, Ghana. I drove over to the next country, Togo, flew over, met the minister in Gabon when he arrived with the delegation. And everybody was there, Jesse, and there was a lot of controversy because there wasn't enough hotel rooms. And in Gabon, very few people speak English. Everybody speaks French because there's no demand on them speaking English. So we're walking through the hallway one morning, and Reverend Schuler is there. Anybody know Reverend Schuler, that name? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Reverend Schuler had a television ministry. It was from the Crystal Cathedral, they called it, in California. Mm-hmm. And you can Google him and see. He's passed away, and after he died, there was internal dynamics within the church. Very powerful group. A lot of the stars and people went there because he balanced his lecture between spiritual and secular conversations of what was going on. So he sees the minister. He says, Minister Farrakhan. He said, I always wanted to meet you. Now, the minister used to watch him some Sundays. And so he asked the minister to come, could we have a cup of coffee? And he went downstairs to this coffee room in the hotel. And then he said, I do a lot of talking and I meet a lot of people. He said, so when I meet people, instead of me talking and so forth, I say to him, tell me your story. And see, he didn't know any way to, did you know about this?
No, I know, first time hearing it.
Okay. So the thing about this session is to tell your story. And I used to say on the road when I'm teaching, I don't say it much anymore because I think that I repeated it long enough and strong enough, is that if every Muslim was a prolific writer, you could write, and you wrote the story of how you came into Islam, it could actually be a bestseller.
Yeah.
There's a book that one of our sisters wrote called Making Mary, and it was about her life, how she came into Islam. And when you write a book, it's not to be a bestseller, but you write it for your family. That's the first thing. So, because if I ask you about your great-grandmother right now, many of you have no knowledge of her, or you just don't know. You may have heard bits and pieces. But if she had the mindset to write her story down, then the grandchildren could read about great-great-grandmother. So your story on how you heard Islam, whether it was in prison, in college, in the street, or somebody stopped you, and then the steps that you went through, and then you became a Muslim, what you encountered, what your thinking was, how you felt about it, or what stumbling blocks did you have. But your story has to be told. If we don't tell our story, somebody else will. There is a woman in Scotland, Dawn Marie Gibson, a white woman, who wrote a book called The History of the Nation of Islam. She ordered one of my books, I sent it, but when she was in graduate school in Scotland, I think in Edinburgh, she chose as a thesis for her PhD, The Nation of Islam. This is a white woman thousands of miles away. Mm-hmm. So you have to tell the story. Then it becomes a body of literature that people 100, 150 years from now, 200 years, just like they pull these old manuscripts off the shelf in the UK and in England, they'll be pulling yours off to read your life because it's unique. Brought to America in the holds of slave ships, enslaved in this country, built this country, freed with a civil war that tore America apart and left deep scars. In the middle of that are these black people. They start going to school, getting educated. They begin to build for themselves and so forth. And that story has to be told. And then you found Islam. So I just wanted to put that in the front. And my story, I don't think it's really unique. It's what thousands of brothers and sisters did when they heard Islam. When they heard the call to Islam, they were looking for something, searching. And as I matured and studied, I always felt this. I didn't mention it today, but I do usually mention it on the road, that in our DNA is Islam. And the reason I say that is because of, number one, where most of us came from. If you do Ancestry.com, or what is the other one down there? 23andMe?
23andMe.
Okay.
And African ancestry.
And what else, the other one?
African
That's a
ancestry.
black owned.
That's a black one? African. If you do that, and it's good if you do it and you're really interested, do 2 or 3 of them. Don't just do one.
Okay.
Okay, and see if the results comes back basically the same. But if you look at it, being that most of us came from the west coast of Africa, this is important of geography and knowing what's happening in those societies. You find that there's Islam in our family. Alex Haley is the greatest witness of that. When he went on a search, Malcolm kept telling him, you probably came from a Muslim family. He didn't believe that at all. He felt that that's the Nation of Islam rhetoric. We didn't come from no Muslim family. We were Muslims because the Muslims were the Arabs. But they didn't know how deep Islam had penetrated West Africa until I was sitting in the minister's office, 1973, I believe, in New York. And he said, Brother Larry, I want to show you a letter I just got from Alex Haley. And the letter started off, Dear Lewis, because Alex Haley called him Minister Lewis. And he said, and I don't have all of the words, but he said, Malcolm was right. I traced my roots to a small village in Gambia. You know where the Gambia is, anybody? Can you see the Gambia? Small country in the mouth of Senegal. And he said they came from a Muslim village. This is Alex Haley.
Wow.
And that sent him on the search. He didn't accept Islam or become a Muslim, but it sent him on a search. So I'm just saying that, and I don't know, I'm the person today, right? I'm the person.
You're the person. So how did you come? 18.
So, 18. I was in high school in December 1959, and there was a paper in New York called the Herald Tribune. And I'm glad you're recording this and giving me a copy of it, because the beginning of my book that I'm working on, 80% completed. It's my autobiography.
Cool.
And being that I came in the nation at 18, my life is the Nation of Islam. You know, that's what it is. And I'm 76 now.
Mm-hmm.
So I was reading a paper called the Herald Tribune. In New York, we had 3 major papers: New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Herald Tribune, and the Daily News. 4 major papers. So the Herald Tribune was in between the New York Times and the Daily News, which is the paper for the masses. And so I'm reading it, and there's a story about this man, Malcolm X. And it talks about, you know, they have this thing, they say they're Muslims, as they call us. Then they said where they meet at in Harlem, and they said you get on the elevator and you take it to the 4th floor, then some men there, they search you, you know, and you go into this meeting. So they wrote about it, I read it out. It just fascinated me. I knew nothing about Islam or anything like that. It actually fascinated me. Then one of my friends, and ended up, my sister married his brother, and his name, we called him Lefty. His name was Horace Smith. So I told him about the Imam. He said, I've been there. I went to the meeting. And he kept on going back and forth. Then I said I wanted to have one upmanship on him. So I said, I've been to the meeting. Honorable Elijah Muhammad said the Negro's tongue is bent in a lie. And so I'm lying now because I hadn't been to the meeting. And then he said, you haven't been to the meeting. My street name was Junie. He said, Junie, you haven't been to the meeting. Then I said, I have been to the meeting. I said, you go in this building, it's on 116th Street in Harlem, you take an elevator upstairs, there's a brother there that searched you, all this was in the newspaper. So, and he said, oh man, I don't believe you've been there. I said, I wouldn't know that if I didn't go there. So he said, I'm gonna take you there next Sunday. And then he asked me about, did you hear Malcolm speak? I said, no. He said, well, if you went there, you would have heard him speak. We went through all of that. And the next week he took me. I went with him. And I was being cool because I knew I hadn't been there before. So I go to the meeting, and you know, they take the first timers and sit them on the first row. And so I'm sitting there, and Imam Muhammad is teaching. Malcolm was out of town. Imam Muhammad came up from Philadelphia, and the way that Malcolm handled it, whenever he'd go out of town, he'd bring in ministers who could hold his crowd, because he had a tremendous crowd. Low crowd was 350.
Wow.
950 was when we packed it and the brothers would have to be outside. But when he go away and come back and we would spread the word Malcolm was going to be at the mosque this weekend, that mosque had 900 people in it. That was unbelievable. And, you know, and I just thought that was regular because I'm new. So I sit there on the first row, I'm looking around, and in those days I used the little weave, okay? And 18 New York, that's what you do. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this strange place and listening to this guy up here talking. And I can't remember all of the lecture. All I know, he was going after it because he was the minister over Philadelphia for his father. His father had assigned him to Philadelphia. And his name was Wallace Muhammad. And I'm sitting there, and at the end, this is the only thing I can remember about his whole lecture that day. He took a Bible, he had a Bible on the roster, and he took the Bible and he threw it down on the ground. And I jumped, everybody in the first row jumped. And he said, look at you, afraid to death Negroes, you thought a lightning bolt was gonna come through the ceiling. So that's all I remember. Then he asked for the acceptance. And you know, if you are black enough and brave, you know, follow this black man, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he went through all of that. And he said, who would like to do that? I want you to stand up on your feet. So just about everybody in the first row stood up. And I looked, and I had no intentions of standing up. Then I looked at the two brothers who were the security guards at that time. They stood up. They didn't sit down in chairs like they do today. They stood up, and they had two brothers, Sidney and Gladstone. I remember their names to this day because when I became a Muslim, I met them. One of them was a lieutenant, the other was a security officer that was always with Malcolm. And they stood up there, and I mean, these brothers were big. And I said, well, these guys look like they've been smoking some dope, and they may jump on me. I better get up. so I got up. They took me to the back, a brother named Julian, bless his heart, I saw him on a film recently. And he explained everything. I took the letter, and I was really now getting interested, and I wrote the letter. And then what happened there was, I think they were Ahmadiyya Muslims on 125th Street in New York. And I'm searching for literature, you know, I like to read. And I went to their bookstore. And this is in between me going back to the mosque. And I went in, and there was a man, and I later learned his name. It was Dawood. Talib Dawood was his name. And I didn't know all of the history, but he married a singer, and you can Google her, Dakota Staten. She was a jazz singer. You Google it sometime. So I went in and I was looking for some books on Islam. So I told him, you know, young, 18 years old, I said, I went to the mosque and I heard Malcolm and I want to get some literature. Then he started downing the mosque. He started talking, they're not Muslims, they're not this, they're not real Muslims. I mean, he went over this thing. And now imagine, I'm a new innocent Muslim trying to learn.
Right.
And I was shocked. I mean, I was confused. So I said, next week I'm going to go back to the mosque and check this thing out. So I mean, I stopped. I didn't write my letter or anything. I went back. Malcolm was there. And he laid a lecture out. And then I was convinced this is what I want to be a part of. So I forgot all about what Dawood was saying. And I came in the nation. The rest is history.
And you said, you mentioned on the interview today how you came in under Malcolm and you were in his ministry class, the ministry class that he had. So how was that? And just how was it? I was just telling Brother Dwayne is interested, like we're in the presence of somebody like yo, you actually knew Malcolm, touched
Right.
Malcolm. You know what I'm saying? Like I only seen Malcolm from books, but like you were in the presence of somebody who you've been in Malcolm's presence. Like, so how was he just as a person and being in a ministry class? How was all of that?
Well, he started a ministry class because when Malcolm was good, he was good. I mean, he worked. He wasn't lazy, and he knew how to make the imprint, the footprint of the nation in New York City. Trust me, he worked. So he started a ministry class because he wanted to make helpers for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I mean, he would, when he got a good helper in the mosque, or somebody was good, like some of the secretaries, the National Secretary of the Nation of Islam, John Ali, came through New York. He was from Philly. Well, he was from Philly, but Malcolm started Philly. And so Malcolm found out that this man was bright, he was good. He recommended him to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And either other people he recommended to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So it's the same in the ministry. He wanted to make helpers. He knew that he alone, as the top spokesman for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, could not cover everything. So he wanted to get helpers. So he trained Minister Farrakhan. And when you know the story when he was going to put the minister over Boston, and there was a minister there named Ulysses who kind of walked away. I saw him recently too. He came to Mosque Miriam, Ulysses. And so Malcolm was going to put the minister over the mosque, and he was training Minister Farrakhan. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, try him under before you put him over. You ever heard the minister go into that? You know? And so he was making a helper, but he tried him under someone to see if he would obey and how he would act. And he acted very well, and he soldiered. Eventually, the minister became the minister of the Boston Mosque, number 11. So Malcolm started the class. And see, the average brother that comes to the mosque, and he is you teaching. And he sits there, he's a young brother, and you're a good teacher. He's impressed. And down in his heart, and there's nothing wrong with it, brother, you want to be a minister. You want to teach. You feel you can teach too. You can talk about this that's impacted your life. Most people don't want to say that. No, I'm trying to be no minister. I want to come in and help the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's you trying to put your ego in check. But in reality, you like to do what you see your minister do because you feel that you'd have a platform to help and explain what you're doing. So Malcolm, in reality, he knew that reality. So he opened the class up. Some brothers felt they weren't qualified. I didn't know whether I was qualified or not. I knew I wanted to get involved. So I joined the class. And out of the class members, I may have been the newest one in terms of longevity. the nation, you know. So I joined the class, and it was a good class. The things that he taught us that I still hold on today. And when I teach the ministry class to some of the brothers, I give those examples. But
What were some of those things he taught, those examples?
well, first he said you have to prepare. A lot of brothers shoot from the hip. And you're too new to shoot for the hip. Minister Farrakhan used to spend 8 hours a day studying. So it was an accumulation of knowledge with him, and his desire to know and to do a good job for his teacher. So Malcolm said that you have to prepare. I remember a minister he invited to New York to teach when he was on the road. This minister came, and Malcolm, like you had an interview for me today, Malcolm would always set up interviews for him. And his purpose of setting the interview up is to try to get more people to come to the mosque meeting. This brother made a statement about Eisenhower, who was the president of the United States in the 50s, being a Jew. And the man who was interviewing him on the radio challenged him on it. And because Eisenhower was not a Jew. And so when Malcolm came back from the trip, I'll never forget, we were in the restaurant, and he was talking about it because the brother had left town. And he was saying the reason that the man got him on that radio on this point, because he didn't do his homework. He didn't study. And you can't go on there shooting from the hip. And he was saying the same thing on the roster. Then he used to have jokes with us, you know. He used to say that, you know, because when you open up with him, and you know, you're nervous and everything, so you tend to leave your notes on the roster. And he had a signal that we used today. And his signal was when he comes up there and sits down, and he'll listen to you and applaud for you and smile and everything. And then he'll say, and he don't say it real loud, he'll say, make it plain. That's the signal, sit down and shut up. And so, we had a brother that kept going. That was his last night. Malcolm, because Malcolm said it 2 times, and he just kept rolling. He was probably in the spirit or something, and he thought he was impressing Malcolm.
Wow.
And I can't remember when he opened up again. But he also said to us, these are things, I mean, he said a lot of things, but these are things I remember that just stuck with me. And if you count back, that was 1962, 63, how many years ago was that?
You gotta get the calculator for that. 54? Say 54.
54 years ago. And that's how the mind is, though, in terms of your memory. The thing about the aging process, you lose a lot of it, but the mind is like a computer. Malcolm used to say to us, he said, brother, sometimes you leave your notes on the roster, and I come up there after you and your notes are still there. He said, and I read them, and I said, may Allah bless the believer, the poor believer. And then he was always talking about going after our people, because in his early days when he got out of jail, he would go into barber shops. Because believe it or not, barbers are generally very knowledgeable brothers. And hairdressers, women, as long as you're not talking about the Atlanta housewives, you know. But a lot of information is exchanged in the beauty salon while the woman is working on your hair. Things about life. But cab drivers and barbers, because what they do, they get a chance to probe heads. While he's cutting your head, you know, he's talking about what's happening in the streets and the struggle. That's where barbershop came from, even though it degenerated into something it shouldn't have been. And the minister had Cedric, I was blessed to be at his house the day at the farm, and Cedric and Ice Cube came up there.
Wow, so you were there.
I was there.
How was that?
That was unbelievable, because the minister was warning them, you know, the Jews that wrote the script, and talking, they said something derogatory about
Dr. King.
Dr. King and Rosa Parks. And he warned them, he said, one day in the future, they'll play your film, and it'll be turning the people off against people who've been in the leadership of this struggle.
How did Cedric the Entertainer and Q
Cedric,
respond?
they listened. They listened, they didn't, like, come back, I had a good talk with Cedric because his parents lived across the street where I had moved my mother in St. Louis. But Q used to come to the study groups when he was in Compton. And when we were rebuilding, I used to go out there. They used to teach at the Black Center, they called it, I can't think of it.
He would attend those meetings.
He would come to the meetings. Because when he was up there, the minister was introducing me to Q. And Q said, I know Akbar. He used to topographical center. He used to come out to the top center and speak all the time. And so after that, we got, we were tight. But I'm just showing that Malcolm had a ministry class to produce ministers. One of them is alive, Brother Hakeem, who died in Huntsville, and the minister did his funeral.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? He used to be our minister in Detroit. Hakeem was in that class. Then there's a brother named Louis Omar, who lives in Baltimore, that was in that class. There's a brother named Lawrence, and I think he's still alive. He lives in Atlanta. These are the brothers who and Benjamin is dead, who left with Malcolm, became his assistant. But those are the brothers who were in that class. So
you mentioned, I asked you just some of the examples that he shared with the class. One of the things, you talked about how, we've witnessed the fall of Colin. We've also seen many greats. There's this lecture on YouTube that's talking about the disciples of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and there was several of them, like regional ministers, that they were speaking. And I looked at it, it's maybe on like a handful left, like Kadir, Ava. So you were in New York at that time with a man of Malcolm's statue, right? Like, so what was it like seeing his falling away? But also, how did you as a believer handle that? Because sometimes that's a trial for believers to see greats fall, or even people in the mosque leave.
it was rough because I, like the thousands of believers that we had there, we loved Malcolm because he's our minister. We didn't understand it. When I first heard what was happening, and I'm young, I thought it was a ploy to get people to listen to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, because I just couldn't see Malcolm leaving the nation. And why I stayed was because of him, because of Malcolm. Because it, many of Sundays, and I can see him as I sit here now walking across that stage, talking about, I don't care what you see, because he talked with his finger like this. And I don't care what you see anybody do. You stay with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He's the man. And he would always say this. And when he left, that came right to my mind. And I thank Allah. And I stayed with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But I was confused. And in my autobiography, I have to write in detail, because what happened, I was the person that was selected by Shaw, me and a brother named John DX, to go pick Malcolm up at his house. We were on security, he was in his car. And Harriet Muhammad, who had married the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's son, Akbar, eventually ended up marrying Salas. She was in the car. She came back from Cairo, where Akbar Muhammad, the youngest son of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad by Sister Clara Muhammad, his first wife. And I went to their house to pick him up and take him down to the Manhattan Center, where he made the famous statement, chickens coming home to roost. And the way it's recorded by some of the scholars, it's absolutely wrong. They said he was at a press conference and this is what he said. It didn't happen like that at all. After Kennedy was assassinated, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave us instructions not to have any comment on his death at all. And we had planned December the 1st, 1963, for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to come to New York. In September 1963, we were in Philadelphia, great meeting in Philadelphia. And Malcolm had been telling us he was asking the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to come to New York. And he hadn't gotten an answer, you know. And he told us in the ministry class. And then what happened, that day in Philly, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave him an okay, he would come. And the date we set was December the 1st, 1963. And if you remember, November the 22nd, Kennedy's killed, 1963, November. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is due in New York in a few days. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad canceled the meeting. And have any of you heard me talk on this before?
No, sir.
Because I talk on it so much sometimes. I guess it's like a different generation. So what happened is we picked up Malcolm, John D. and myself. John D. has since died. And he had the blue Buick. And she was sitting in the back seat. Malcolm was driving. And, you know, I told you to teach with the finger all the way down to Manhattan Center. I saw the finger going like this here. He was talking to her. Then when we arrived at Manhattan Center, we got out the car, and Captain Joseph, who was Malcolm's captain, who many people, is a legend in the Nation of Islam. He was my trainer, and he was Minister Farrakhan's trainer when the minister came in the nation. Malcolm recruited him from Detroit. So Shaw is waiting by the garage door. Malcolm's car pulls in. I'll pull in behind it. The reason I want a copy of this, brother, because, you know, I already have it in my book, but I just want to go through it and see if I missed any details. Then Shaw walked over the car, opened the door for Malcolm. The brothers opened the door for Sister Harriet. And Shaw said, we just turned Hanley around. Hanley was a writer for the New York Times, who over the years have been following Malcolm and writing about him. And because in October of 1963, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad went to Flint, Michigan. And you can see it in Message to the Black Man.
Shut the meeting down. Shut the meeting down.
He shut the meeting down. And the reason he shut it down, there was a police captain or the police commander of Flint who wanted to come in with his gun. And the brothers told him no. They reached an impasse. The Supreme Captain Raymond Sharif went to the stage and interrupted the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and whispered into his ear and told him what was happening. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad listened, turned to the crowd, told them what was happening. There's a police officer who wants to come to this meeting with his weapon, so this meeting is over. And he drove back to the car, back to Chicago in the car, and Minister Farrakhan was in the car, Malcolm's brother, and one other person. They drove back in a limousine. And in the car, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave out instructions that no more white people would be allowed in our public meetings. Then he named the people that you may consider white, but he did not, such as the Turks and some Arabs and different things like that, Pakistanis. And so when Shaw turned Handler around, he was following instructions of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, no more white people in our meeting. Then Malcolm said, told Shaw to go get him and bring him back, let him in. And Shaw went and got him and set him in the meeting. Malcolm taught an excellent lecture that day. It was a moving lecture. It was about the challenge of the world. Talked about the African nations and what was happening. And then at the end, when he closed out, he didn't teach long. That's the first time, because, you know, he knew that the whole country was watching where the nation was on the death of Kennedy, being that we were calling white folks devils. You know, how do we feel about this devil getting killed in Dallas? So he closed the meeting down, then he opened up for questions. And one man stood up, raised his hand. As we sit here now, I can see him. He had a black leather jacket on, like a suit jacket, but it was leather. He was receding, bald a little. He was about my complexion. And he said, Minister Malcolm, could you comment, he said, on the death of President Kennedy. And it looked like, man, the silence was, it may have been only a few minutes, but to me it was a long time, because I knew that this was the controversy. And Malcolm had his head down like this at the rostrum. And then when he came up, he said, being an old farm boy myself, chickens coming home to roost never made me sad, always made me glad. And the crowd broke out into applause, and Malcolm walked off the stage. He didn't take no more questions. So Handler, sitting in the audience, a writer for the New York Times, reported it the next day in the paper. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad saw it in Chicago. Immediately, he suspended Malcolm. I think he gave him 90 days. I have to look at my notes. Because he disobeyed. He made a comment on Kennedy, and the messenger said, do not comment on the death of Kennedy. And that's what started the whole thing. That's how it started.
And so, you know, many of us, oftentimes the stuff that's being wrote about Malcolm is people who weren't there. You know, they're like recycling stuff, but like you just said, even you connected that history from the meeting in Flint, how it influenced that. That was interesting. And even how Malcolm answered the question and walked off. And so you were also in New York during the time, like where were you when the death took, when he was murdered?
I was in the mosque. I was helping the secretary. Maceo Aziz, who was our secretary, we had a closeness, and he needed some help in the mosque in Queens. Though I was an assistant minister, I was helping in the secretarial department. And I get a call from Maceo, February the 21st, 1965, about 2-something in the afternoon. It had to be maybe 2:30, maybe the records will show when he was killed. Maceo called me and said, Malcolm was just killed at the Audubon Ballroom. Close down and bring your package. That's the charity of the believers. Bring it to New York. And I was trying to do a few more figures, and I got another call. Have you closed down? And I had to tell the minister, who was George Hakeem, who died in Huntsville. I had to tell him. And when I told him, he immediately announced to the believers, and we had some screams, and a couple of sisters hollered out, crying, because he was their minister. He brought them into Islam. And, you know, you don't just cut off things like a faucet. And, you know, so they were screaming at the mosque, and we were instructed to close the meeting down. He said a closing prayer, and everybody left. I went straight uptown and took the package. That's what, it's like 9/11. You can remember where you were. I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, when 9/11 took place. I just came in from Africa, and I was on my tour to raise funds, and I was auctioning off African clothes and artifacts. And but I remember exactly where I was, and I remember when Malcolm was killed, exactly what I was doing. And it's a thing about memory I want to share with you. You know, sometimes you keep things to yourself, especially in the ministry. Like if you got a book that you're getting a lot of information out, you don't share it with everybody because you want to, you know, keep this like you got some niche on this wisdom. But as I mature, I realize that that's not what to do. Whatever you learn that you can help brothers and sisters, if they're preachers or in their understanding, you should share it. I used to have, you know, people say I was good at remembering names, dates, and facts. You know, the other night I was with the minister, and we were meeting with the family of Reverend Cohen, who was, you know, who died, and the minister did his funeral Saturday. And there was a name we couldn't think of. And I realized, Jerry Butler, I mean, the man I know very well, but I couldn't call his name. And this is the evil accident of time in terms of memory. But there's a system. When people said that I could remember names, I never really told them my system. They just thought I could remember a name. But there's a man named Lucas who had a book on memory for children. It was excellent. How do they remember all 50 states in the capital? And he gives the key to it, okay? And you would think that the person is good, but it's a key, that's all. And the key was that whatever you want to remember, you have to think of something odd or difficult with it. Like when you meet people, you know, look at their face. When they say, my name is Gloria, and you can look at her face and say, this is a glorious woman. See? So when she steps in front of you 8 months from now and you look at her face, you'll say, Gloria, glorious woman. Because it was something strange, you know. If you meet a brother and he's real ugly, okay? And his name is Umar. Ugly starts with U and Umar starts with U. So when you look at his face, you'll say, ugly. Umar, how are you? I'm just giving you examples, like I'm giving you those examples, but like a state. I'm just talking about Little Rock. So you want to remember the capital of Little Rock, the capital of Arkansas, and you say Little Rock. So think of a little rock and a soar going through it. So when you say Arkansas, you think of a soar going through a little rock, and the name will come right back to your mind. That's the way the mind is. So it's called Lucas's, and now that I'm older, and there's a generations coming behind me, why should I keep this to myself so people can say, man, Akbar's heavy, man. He knows a lot of stuff and whatnot. But it's a system, that's all it is. And even when you're reading, like I was reading about Louisiana, and in particular, New Orleans, and the great fires of New Orleans. There were two. And I wanted to remember one of the years, something happened in 1722 here, but one of the fires was later. They were back to back. One fire burned down most of the city. And after the second fire occurred, they started changing how they built the buildings. And that's why the buildings in the French quarters are still there. It was because of the fires. See? So and I tried to penetrate my mind to it, because the Spaniards ruled first here. They were here. Then the French came. Then the Spaniards left. They came back for a minute. Then the French, yeah. And before the English got it. And then in 1803, see, I looked at the number, and that was when they consummated the deal with Napoleon. But being I know history, I know that Napoleon was uptight and he needed money to pursue his war. And so that's why he dumped the Louisiana Purchase, and New Orleans was a part of that purchase. All of y'all know that history, right?
Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay.
We're going to take it for 8th grade. In regards to, I heard the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan talk about how, I mean, a lot be pleased with Betty Shabazz, that when they had the trial, and she actually, the men that she identified as being the murderers of her husband, she knew that they weren't in the ballroom.
Yeah. She knew, but the prosecuting attorney, I mean, in her emotion and all of that at the time, they cultivated that idea. Two of them, Norman and Thomas, who were lieutenants, one of them worked with me in the morning fruit, because I worked at night in New York. We had a huge morning fruit class because so many night workers in New York. I know absolutely he was not there.
So wait.
So they cultivated her and pushed it, because she just wanted some Muslims convicted, because there were two people caught on the set. One of them they let go, and you never heard about him again. But if you go get the New York Times for February the 22nd, 1965, they mentioned that a second man was captured on the set. But Talmadge Hainer was captured. And in that courtroom, the reason they did that, because three of them were on trial, and Talmadge Hainer said that, I'm guilty. He was out of the mosque. He was from the Patterson Mosque in Newark. And he said, but these two men had nothing to do with it. And the prosecuting attorney, because we had to stop, I was going down to the trial every day, but the Honorable Elijah Muhammad sent word that we shouldn't go down there. And said that in the court, being that they were accusing us, he felt we shouldn't go. And I stopped going. And the thing that happened, the prosecuting attorney wanted to get him, and he delivered terrible indictment. Here's a man, we found him there, captured on the scene. He's guilty. And he's doing the noble thing, trying to liberate his two brothers. He didn't use the word liberate, but to free, clear his two brothers. But they're all equally as guilty. This is the prosecuting attorney. And all of them got 25 to life in prison for something they didn't do. Norman I was the closest to. I watched this man lose his family, his wife and his beautiful children, and all of those years that he stayed in prison. And I remember when Imam Muhammad, I got to put this in my book, I took Imam Muhammad to see him at Attica. He was in Attica at the time. And Imam Muhammad, because we were the only two that could go in where they were holding him at, the group of brothers came, and Imam Muhammad said, even if you're guilty, you're innocent. And I remember his name was Aziz, Muhammad Aziz. He said, but Brother Imam, I am not guilty. See, he didn't know. He wasn't even in the nation when this was going on, Imam Muhammad. But he believed the hype that was out there, that this brother and the other brother with him, the two lieutenants, were guilty of it, and they were not. So,
And so transitioning from there, we know that the mosque was burned down, and then the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan came. What do you remember about when he was first put over the mosque in New York?
well, the mosque burned down on that Monday night, the 22nd. We had fruit class, we all went home. There was a fire. The secretary called me. I lived at the bottom of the bridge. He said, meet me at the bottom of the bridge. I didn't have a car, and I didn't get to the bottom of the bridge in time. Then I had to take a taxi over to the mosque, and it was still burning when we got there. But we know that the enemy did that. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad appointed Minister Farrakhan. I don't know exactly when he came, but when he came, the city was against the Nation of Islam because of what was in the newspapers, that we murdered Malcolm, and then they arrested two of our brothers who were not even there. You know, went to their homes and arrested them. They were all over the paper that these men had killed Malcolm, and the minister stepped into that atmosphere. And everybody was skeptical about ministers because many people thought that Malcolm had such an influence over many of the ministers that they were really with him. And Minister Farrakhan was one who suffered that from people in the mosque and even some officials. And so he was watched closely, but Allah blessed him because he brought a certain spirit. His spiritual depth. Malcolm was a profound teacher, but Malcolm's spiritual depth was not like Minister Farrakhan's. And he worked to try to regain everybody's confidence that he was absolutely 100% with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and he was going to work to bring New York back together and instill the spirit that we had before Malcolm left the nation in that mighty mosque. It was the strongest mosque in the country. It was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's biggest helper, financed the selling of the paper, new converts. New York was it. We never said that publicly when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, because there was Mosque 2 where he was at. So we didn't want to make it look that New York was trying to compete with Chicago and outshine Chicago. So we never talked about it, but after the fact now I can talk about it, you know.
So the minister talks about how effective you were and still are as a helper to him. And you talked about for 10 years you served and assisted him. And we've also heard the minister talk about like how, I think it's in a study guide, he was talking about how sometimes, how fickle men can be. How like very few men have the ability to serve another man without the idea of trying to overthrow them or I'm better than him. And how is it, what made you so where you didn't fall victim to that mindset?
Because I knew my capacity and I knew what he represented to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And if I'm there as a Muslim and I say I love the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and here's the man that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had put his hand on and the job that he was doing for him. And I just wanted to be a helper. And see, the thing about disloyalty is that you have to have some kind of ambition. You don't just become disloyal. And I knew my place. See, it's one thing to be somewhere, but when you know your capacity. I knew what God blessed him to do, I could not do. I knew that. So what would I look like trying to, get some glory on myself? That's why, and a lot of times I never took pictures, Holly. I'd step in the background because I watch brothers who, when the minister's taking a picture, they get all over in the back and everything. like that picture of you and the minister gonna make you something. How many papers did you sell? How many dead did you get? What did you do for the mosque last week? But you want to get in that picture because you crave notoriety. There's a Muslim philosopher named Al-Ghazali. He writes in another one who's not a Muslim but has a name that many people think he's a Muslim, Khalil Gibran, who wrote the Prophet. Okay, Al-Ghazali said, "Be careful or beware of the dangers of fame and notoriety." Black people in America can see that with entertainers and stars. Because some of them crave, as Kenny Gamble. You all know the name Kenny Gamble?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just want to know if I was dating.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, Kenny Gamble said that Akbar, he was in Ghana, he came to Ghana with me and stayed there unbelievable 8 days. He said that to some of these entertainers, it's more important to be famous than to have a hit tune to make some money. They only want a hit tune because it's going to make them famous. Some people will say, well, they should want a hit tune so they can make that money, go on tour, sell those records. No. He said that's what they want. But it's like Khalil Gibran in The Prophet describes it as like a heady wine. You get drunk off fame and notoriety. And it happens in the nation. The ministers suffered from a lot of the ministers across the nation. Only because they were jealous of the favor of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad on him and his unique ability to reach people. So, no, I thank Allah. I'm 76, 10 years in New York with 10 great years. I mean, the Black Family Day, Jamaica, the Muhammad Ali Day in Jamaica, our schools, our 21 businesses. We were doing 5,000 bean pies a day. Our bean pies were in all of the black stores in the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn. We didn't have too many in Staten Island. Anybody here that knows New York? And that's our bean pies were there. We had to open up 2 more bakeries just to satisfy. We created jobs for the brothers. Then we had a unique baker that you picked the pies up because the pies only had a shelf life of 5 to 7 days, unless you kept them in the refrigerator. And many of them, store owners didn't want to give refrigeration space to the pie, so we would pick them up. This baker turned the bean pies that were turned back into cookies. And he was excellent, Brother James. Turned them into what was bean cookies, and the Muslims ate them up. That means that we were recycling, not losing pies and so forth. And we made money, and that money fueled the New York operation. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave us extra on the paper. If the paper was 15 cents and we sold it for a quarter, Chicago got 15 cents. And I don't know if we made it public, but I think since then the minister had, but we only paid 10 cents for it. And the rest of the money, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, put it on the school. Because he knew to support a school, the tuition of the believers is not going to do it. You got to pay teachers a decent salary. You got to keep them with you. And you need money to do that. You're running school buses. And we sold 85 to 100,000. A couple of times we hit 100,000, but usually 85,000 a week in New York City. So I don't know how we got.
No, that was good. I'll ask you this question, then we'll open up if people have any questions. I know there's some sisters who are going to be serving us, and I want to hold them up. So my last question is, what lessons did you learn from the fall and the rebuilding of the nation?
I hate to use this tired saying, that's a good question. That's an interesting question. That's what if you listen to people who are interviewed, great question, my brother. Because I have to think about it. One of the greatest lessons that I learned, I believe, is that you got to move forward, and you have to be sensitive to people and know different levels, the different capacity of an individual. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave it to Minister Farrakhan like this: when you put a board under the house and you see it begin to fold, you snatch it out because it can't take the weight. Well, that's with individuals. Brothers join the mosque, and because we're aggressive trying to get things done and move things, we put a lot of weight, sisters, and pressure on them. And you see they begin to buckle. Either you see it in their contents, you see it in their spirit, you see it in their charity. There may be problems. And as ministers who are like pastors who help the believers, you got to be able to spot it. Some men don't have the ability that other men have. And you don't judge them as less, but this is their capacity. You have to understand it. I learned that in rebuilding from the minister. And I learned it because he didn't want to put a lot of weight on people who came to help him. He wanted them to take the weight that they could take, and he would not pressure people. Then the minister, I learned, I knew it in New York, but I didn't pay good attention to it as I should have because I was always so busy, but his ability to listen. He made a statement, and I have it on a few of my talks, when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad took Muhammad Ali's name and wrote an article about him in the paper, and he did this for little money. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, if you see that paper, you can probably get a copy from Brother Carlos. That night we were leaving the mosque, and there was an assistant minister, William 50. He was in our ministry class, and he was making we walking the minister to the car. There was an officer, myself, and Brother William 50. 50X. He was the 50th brother in New York that got an X. We were up to 237, and we called it C-237, 137 brothers named James, and so forth. So Brother William 50 made mockery of Muhammad Ali, doing that for a lid of money, and he said something else. And the minister stood by his car door and he said these words. He said, never be quick to condemn and always be slow to judge. He got in the car because the minister loved Muhammad Ali and slammed the door because you don't know what your test would be and how the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would test you. And the minister was just quiet on it, but this brother was verbally going after Muhammad Ali, and he had nowhere near the stature of Muhammad Ali as assistant minister in the mosque, and he wasn't on that level to be judging the brother. And if you had a judgment, keep it to yourself. And so what I learned from that rebuilding is don't be quick to judge people. The people who were confused by what happened in the nation with the departure of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, his son taking over and taking the nation in a different direction that they didn't understand. And so don't condemn people who are trying to get their own balance in what happened to the nation. And then another thing that the minister did, he called all of the old helpers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad who were like out in the water, not doing anything. And he invited them to Chicago when we got the Final Call building. And he was asking them to help. See, and he knew that among those who he invited, there were many that didn't like him. But he did his duty by it. He was younger than many of them, and they just didn't like the what Minister Farrakhan's gift from God was. That was his gift. And they didn't appreciate it because maybe rolling around in them, there was some jealousy, and they wanted his gift. But God gifts whom he pleases. And I tell people when they were at that time saying that this and that, I say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. You have to be a southerner to understand that. And so the work of Minister Farrakhan was his response to them, not words, not talking about it. And so I learned that. And then after we were going after rebuilding the nation, the minister said that ceremony, I'll never forget this, because I was wondering if we were spending too much money on these new Savior's Days that we were having, and we were really broke. But the minister said that ceremonies and what people would call pageantry is important to the spirit of a people. To bring us all together in Chicago, see brothers from New Orleans and brothers from Mississippi and California, you know, to honor the day of the Savior's birth in Chicago together, he said is important. So we have to do that in bringing the believers together. And I mean, I watched him in the rebuilding of the nation. And the minister we went to, this will be the last one, we went to Cornell University where all of these college students who loved Malcolm. And Dr. James Turner invited him to speak to him. And, you know, on the way he was going over with me, and it was just the two of us, what he was going to do, present. And when he got in that room and he felt the environment, even the way that Dr. James Turner, who was like one of our friends, introduced him, the room was quiet. And I asked the minister about it later, and he said, I called on Allah. Allah changed my subject completely, and he broke through. And I said to myself that Allah is with him.
Yes, sir.
Has guided even the trials, and when we were broke and so forth, and didn't have money, and he was going around, and Kenny Gamble was getting him engagement. Allah was with him. And in that day, I witnessed it because these students were hostile to Louis Farrakhan. And when he finished, they were up there trying to shake his hand. The ones that they wanted to take pictures with him. And it was just a witness for me that we had to move this forward. And you lose people. There's casualties. It's like in warfare. And you shed a tear for them, but you don't stop struggling and fighting.
Right.
And we lost people, good people, due to misunderstanding, doing the best that we could. They just went home. They didn't want nothing else to do with it. The good ones that loved Allah and his messenger didn't leave and talk about it. They left because they had some personal pain over something, and they went home in their quiet way. The ones who were jealous and envious and felt that they should be more than what they were, they went and talked about us. And even some of them went and joined Silas, because Silas, when they came, Silas would give them a name or give them something. See, they wanted to be something, try to make them a prophet or something. Madness. I mean, Clarence 13, who started the 5 percenters, he basically did the same thing. Because all of them looking for somebody. My last point on this, this is the last. I'm a preacher, so I get 3 closing talking points. So we went to a city, and it was at the time that people were getting the signals that the nation was about to make a change because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was sick. And they knew that something was going on. So this brother picks us up and his assistant, and he's a minister. So we're riding in the car, the minister and myself, we in the back seat. So he said, Brother Minister Farrakhan, who do you say you are in the scripture? See? And the car got quiet. So the minister said, well, brother, I don't read this scripture or spend time reading the scripture, was his exact words, trying to find out who I'm in. who am I in the scripture, I spend that time trying to identify the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the scripture. And because the talk was the minister thinks he's something in the scripture, he's this or that. And the questioning was rooted in jealousy and envy. And so some of them wanted to be something. But God has not chosen that for you. So you have to know, as the minister used to teach on Malcolm when he left, and he would be talking to the believers, you know, in the private meetings. He would say to our holdback meetings, he would say that many of you wanted to walk in Malcolm's footsteps. You won't know, he said, many of you wanted to be in Malcolm's shoes, but you didn't know where those shoes were taking you. Thank you.
So, you know, we have some people going to be at the table, so you can hold your questions. Anybody have questions? If not, just call it. I'm not going to do this all day. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Brother Nunzi.
Oh, my question, thank you for being here, first of all, sir. It's an honor to see you again. I had a chance to meet Silas Muhammad when he was in the rebuilding effort in the early 70s, and when he came to Oakland, he was
Khalid Muhammad?
No,
Silas.
Silas Muhammad.
Silas.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he was really, at the time, I had just kind of got getting acquainted with the minister, but I was wondering, he did a lot of crime for some reason about his position, why he should have been in the minister's place. And my question to you is, why did he think that? I mean,
Well,
he never said why he did a lot of crime, just said that he should have been, and Mr. Farrakhan was like I said, it was maybe 1977, rebuilding effort. But I never knew what position he held or why he felt that way.
yeah, that was in 78, I think it was, and he was in Oakland. Was it a time that the minister was out there too?
Yes, sir.
Okay. First of all, I think that Silas makes the statement that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad appointed him. A lot of people say that. So I was with the messenger and he said that I should lead or this and that. Or, a lot of people say that. So the question is that if you are that, then you have to say to yourself that I know that I'm the one that the messenger wants, but I'll wait my time. Because if it's for me, God will give it to you. So you ain't got to fight nobody and talk about I should be the one. That's the worst thing you can say. I should be the one. You know, that's terrible. So I don't know, you know, Silas has made some changes. It goes back and forth. So I don't know what's on his mind. But I said it. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. All you have to do is, God has blessed the minister, guided. I mean, which one of them could have got the mosque back in Chicago? I mean, or the National House. Which one of them could make a call for 1 million men and nearly 2 million show up? Which one of them could do it? God shows you things. Even Imam Muhammad's followers, when they announced that they were not coming to the march, thousands of them had to look and to hear the call to prayer on the Capitol steps and see nearly 2 million people standing out there. That's not a fluke.
Yes,
That's not some gimmick that somebody came up. That's God's hands on Minister Farrakhan to be able to do that. And so if you're arguing about, well, go and produce something. It's like casting your rod down. You're going before Pharaoh. And God showed whose side he was on when the serpent of Moses ate up the serpent of the magicians who were casting for Pharaoh. So, but I noticed those that joined Silas, and even this one called the prepared one. I don't have time to go into that one. The one that says the palace can fly, but Minister Farrakhan doesn't know where the controls are. Okay, so I'm not going to, maybe on another trip to New Orleans, we'll take that on. So why if he thinks that, even if he thought that and went to work, but not engage his mouth to say that, And if he was the right one, time is a test of all men and all ideas. That's the words that I used with Clarence 13, the one who started the 5%ers when I met him. Because he said he was Allah.
Wow.
Came out of the mosque, you know, he was out during the time Malcolm defected, and he was out there, and he was out on 2 times because Shaw, our captain, was deaf on brothers hitting their wives. If a sister, if you're in your private home, your husband hits you, sister, and you want to keep it your personal business, you don't tell nobody or report him, that's your business. But once you come to that mosque and tell your sister captain, this man is abusing me, he beats me and whatnot, then we have to step in and do our duty as Muslim. That's how Clarence 13, and the 5%ers don't like me about it. They got a problem with Akbar Muhammad. Because that's what happened. I lived it. They don't know nothing about it. They were not even born. They wouldn't have thought in their mother and father's body. So I lived it. And I'm not going to put no honey on that or ice cream on it and try. That's what happened. Now that's what history says. It's like the people in the nation now who don't want to say anything about Khaled's work on behalf of the Minister Farrakhan. Khaled went left, but he did something. And he's a part of the history of the nation. Clarence was out of the mosque because he hit his wife. And he did it 2 times. First time he got 30, second time he got 90 days. During that time, Malcolm left the nation and he became totally confused. And so, but I'm sorry, I think that we have to go downstairs and okay, we got a question here.
We'll take this last question.
Okay.
This is not a question, but this is a testimony. I visited 2 of the temples under the teachings of Sayyidina Muhammad. I didn't feel no energy, no life. It just felt like a mourning,
Okay,
a funeral. And so one was in Atlanta and one was in Jackson, Mississippi, and we got out of there.
Wow.
Another sister and I visited, and we just looked at each other at the temple in Atlanta, and we was like,
Well, some people, I was in Atlanta, and I passed by a temple said, Nation of Islam, Mosque 615. And my wife looked at it and she said, is this one of the mosques from the nation? I said, no. I didn't know who the group was. But the thing about it is that you went. And you went and you sampled the spirit. And you know when you get the right feeling. We're not perfect. But we about the best that can be found around. Now we got all our faults. We're not perfect, but it's the heart. Allah judges you on intentions. And what is the intention of the heart? I want to thank you. I know I'm long-winded. Thank you.
See, thank you.